And then all of a sudden you look up and there's something there that shouldn't be there. And then you notice that there's things inside of it that don't appear to be human. That would be terrifying to me. It was summer 1974. The witness, Richard, he asked that his last name not be disclosed, then 10 years old, was on school holidays. He was halfway up on the east coast of Sweden, staying at a family friend's cabin overlooking the sea with his family. It was a carefree time spent fishing, den building, and playing, and as was more normal back then, myself and my brothers did a lot of free ranging, he recalled. Richard and his family were having a wonderful time, not a care in the world. Sadly, it wouldn't last. That respite from the troubles of the real world would soon give way to something truly strange, something far beyond Richard's scope of understanding, the day some odd visitors arrived at camp. Richard remembered that sometime that day he and his brother had hatched a plan to camp on their own away from their parents. He and his older brother eventually got permission to camp out on the headland overnight. To get to it, they needed to row a boat across the small bay. The parents had no problem with the idea as long as they were safe and didn't cause a commotion. The two brothers immediately packed a small tent, sleeping bags, a camping stove, and some other necessities, and off they went on their little adventure. It was late in the afternoon when they made the trip across, arriving just a little before dusk. Being summer, it was light until quite late, so we set up camp and got settled in. As the light began to fade, we fired up the stove and started cooking ourselves some supper. Richard noted that they had a Trangia burner, a methylated spirits camping stove, which emitted a small amount of blue light via the flame. I still wonder if that could have attracted attention to us, he noted. Richard recalled that where they were camping, there was a hill in which several cows seemed to roam around. Every once in a while he would look up to watch them. It was during one of these glances up that he noticed something odd hovering over the hilltop. It was big, up to 70 to 100 feet wide, and completely stationary, and it seemed to be just above the ridge of the hill. The object was saucer-shaped with windows spanning most, if not all, of the width of the craft. As Richard stared at the craft, he suddenly made out something inside that truly frightened him. It was lit up inside, and watching us from within were between 3 and 5 figures. I could see their silhouettes backlit by the lights. They appeared to be bald and of slight build. The craft remained where it was despite me closing my eyes and wishing it would disappear. As you can imagine, I was pretty scared by what I was seeing. As Richard watched on in fright, he noted that his brother, who seemingly was aware of the craft, immediately began to downplay it. His reaction was not what I expected, and he continued cooking, telling me to ignore it and he'd just go away. This response spooked Richard to the point where he decided that he needed to leave. I became really frightened and suggested we go immediately, but my brother said he wanted to stay, seemingly uninterested by what was happening. Richard recalled that he realized that he would not be able to reason with his brother, who was behaving in a way that he didn't understand. He went down to the water, jumped into the rowboat, and rowed as fast as he could back across the bay. This task was made all the more frightening as it was now dark, and he was a sitting duck out on that lake. Upon reaching shore, Richard raced up to the cabin and told his parents what had happened. They were having a drink with friends on the porch and laughed at me, telling me to calm down and not be so silly. Then, on realizing my brother was on his own, I was ticked off for leaving him. Richard's father demanded that he row back over with him to the headland to get his brother and bring him back. I refused point blank as I was petrified, so off he went and returned a while later with my brother, who still seemed unperturbed by the ordeal. The matter was closed as far as everyone else was concerned, but the incident has stayed with me over the years, and I have never doubted that it took place. I clearly recall the whole event and watching the UFO with my brother for several minutes as the occupants watched us, and his comment about just ignoring it. Now a lot older and a little wiser, I sometimes wonder if it was his way of dealing with the experience. A few years later, Richard was at home. They were living in West Wiltshire, when he and his family watched as another saucer-shaped object hovered stationary in the sky for at least a quarter of an hour. Richard noted that it glided smoothly over their home, performing a series of slick 90-degree turns without any change in speed. Regarding the night at the cabin, he said that only 3 of 5 family members remembered that night. Interestingly, one of his parents, he doesn't indicate which one, and his brother have no recollection of that night at all. An editor at the Flying Saucer Review found the fact that Richard's parents dismissed him to be rather frustrating. The post-sighting parental reaction is notable, however, in its total lack of any parental attempt at listening to a child's explanation of what allegedly happened. The 10-year-old Richard reacted to the perceived threat from the unknown saucer, observing his camp, by escaping across the water back to his parents. His older brother was already pacified as if under a trance, so Richard reluctantly abandoned him. In any other situation of perceived threat, the parents would have sprung into action, but on hearing their son mention ETs as the cause of his flight, their adult disbelief system took over as they no longer sensed his panic urgency was real. It became his imaginary threat, not real danger. I found it interesting that the witness did not hear the UFO, which is common in many of these cases, before he sighted it. Instead, he was merely glancing up at some cattle grazing on a hill when he noticed its presence. It seems he recognized immediately that what he was seeing was odd, unnatural. He noted that he attempted many times to close his eyes, hoping that when he opened them, the craft and its occupants would be gone. But there they remained. This type of behavior is common in nighttime bedroom invader cases, when the witness is in bed and attempts to blink away the intruder in the darkness. As the FSR editor noted, his brother's reaction definitely seemed strange. Granted, I don't know Richard's brother, but he would have to be the most chill dude in the world to not react in fright to the presence of a UFO and strange non-human entities. It was as if his brother was indeed in some kind of a trance. His instruction to simply ignore them and they would go away, where did that come from? Had he encountered them before, or were the beings using him as a conduit to calm Richard down? If they were so easily able to manipulate his brother's thoughts, why not Richard as well? Certainly, if it worked on one, why not both? That said, maybe it did, but in different ways. Maybe the intent was to pacify one and frighten the other, triggering the flight response. Was the point of their actions to instill fear in Richard so that he would leave the headland, which would allow them access to the brother alone? Were the beings even there for the brothers at all? I don't know how many accounts I've covered involving cattle and livestock. Were they there for the cows and were surprised to find the brothers there? Were they, as Richard suspected, attracted by the blue light of the stove? In the case of the beings, I guess, this could be looked at as a happy accident on their part. Zelia Edgar, I don't know if you know her, she's an author and a researcher. She has her own channel, which I encourage you to go over and check out. She often talks about how these beings seem to seek out abandoned or desolate areas for which to carry out their activities. I wonder how many of these cases are just happy accidents. Somebody just happens to be at one of these abandoned or desolate locations and are suddenly caught up in their activities. This case seems to fit that mold. If the beings were interested in getting the brother alone for whatever reason, I guess it might explain why he had no recollection of it years later. Maybe the brother wasn't supposed to remember. Another detail I found intriguing. What about Richard? When he got into the boat and rowed back across the bay to the cabin, could he still see the craft on the hill? Could he see it as he rowed away? Did it fly off? He doesn't mention this. He only mentions that he rowed fast and that it was dark out at that point. By retreating in the boat, Richard put himself in a very vulnerable position, out on a lake, alone, in a small boat, surrounded by nothing but darkness and water. Personally, I'd rather take my chances on the headland. But I do wonder if the events of that night played out exactly as Richard remembered them. At no time in his report does he mention any missing time, but the memories of many of those present on that night seems hazy or completely non-existent, which might call into question his own recall of the event. What happened when he left that island? Could he see the object? Why doesn't he talk about what happened? Could he see it take off? What happened with the brother? I suspect the brother doesn't recall what happened on that island because he wasn't supposed to recall it.